David has an outstanding presentation that's going to cover a lot of ground in terms of intergenerational dynamics, trends in aging, and a whole bunch of other things. So I'd like David to get us underway, and we've got about a half an hour, David.
Thank you very much, Ross. Hello, everybody. Just want to make sure everybody's got their food all settled. Very happy to have an opportunity to speak to all the dimensions of carp from coast to coast at the AGM here. And I'm going to be talking about taking another look, deliberate pun, at a new vision of aging. And my job is to maybe flag some of the things that are going on out there that make CARP, and in particular the CARP Chapter Network, all the more important and all the more relevant. Some of the trends I'm going to talk about may or may not be happening in your area, may or may not be happening to the degree that I'm mentioning, because there are important regional variations. But hopefully you'll find some food for thought and maybe a different way of understanding just how important what you're doing is. So what was the old vision of aging? What's the new vision of aging? How and why is CARP so important? And what's coming next? This is the way I'm going to structure this. Now, let's just take a look at the numbers. We have 15 million Canadians 45 plus. In our world, the Zoomer generation. In the world of Stats Canada, boomers, seniors, older Canadians, mature Canadians. We're talking about 15 million people, by far the largest segment, almost 60% of all the adults, as you can see. But here's the most important part. It's the only group who will increase in importance in the population. The bottom line on the graph are 15 to 24-year-olds. As you can see, they represent just under 10% of the action now, going to decrease. 25 to 44, the middle bar on the graph, decrease. The only group that will increase, now all of them will increase in the number, but as a percentage of the pie, the only group that will increase in importance is us. Not hard to figure out why. People are living longer, and the birth rate in Canada just barely sustainability level of about 2.0 children per woman in her fertile years. Europe, by the way, 1.7. An entire continent committing demographic suicide by not being able to replace the population. But we're just holding our own. The Stats Canada has 3 projections. I took the middle one, so it may be even more or slightly less, but it's the only group that's going to increase. Now, as a result of people living longer, and you talked about it this morning, we have a couple of things going on now that have never happened before in our history. We have more people over the age of 60 than under the age of 14. Never happened before. We have, for the first time ever, and we heard some examples this morning when people were asking Mr. Mulcair questions about caregiving, never happened before, a parent and a child both receiving CPP and or OAS. Never happened before. You hear of a 65-year-old person with a 91, 92-year-old parent. You say, great, I hope she lives or he lives a long time, but you don't swerve your car off the road in shock. It's happening more and more. Parent and child both receiving CPP. It's never happened in the history of the country. The old vision of aging, however, was predicated on a couple of things that were pretty much fixed. You retired at 65. You then became an old age pensioner, and you had a lifespan when the pensions were first introduced. And by the way, in 1926, when William Lyon Mackenzie King introduced the first pension, they were means tested. God forbid you should just get your $40 a month is what it was, you know. But at that time, you had a lifespan. If you were collecting at the age of 65, you had about 8 years to go. 7 or 8 years to go, statistically. Today, almost 20 years to go. So here's the old vision of aging. Regardless of the diversity of my symbolic figures, by age, by male, female, rich, poor, professional, blue collar, well educated, not well educated. They all went in the same funnel, and out came a relatively passive, relatively helpless senior citizen, pretty much dependent on the young people and with not much time left to go. So the old vision of aging was one-dimensional. Everybody turned out about the same at around the age of 65, and maybe you were lucky enough to have the last 8 to 10 years of your life relatively comfortable. Maybe you weren't, but you were all pretty much fixed as helpless. We're going to wipe that vision out as we go through the presentation. By the way, just for fun, I inserted this figure. Here's some 50-year-olds from the 1960s. They don't look anything like the people in this room, I don't think, right? So ignoring the bar loungers and the big hair and all that, these are people well on their way to that image I just showed you. They are 5 to 10 years short of senior citizen, helpless, passive, withdrawing from society, old vision of aging. We have more old people today, but it's not that there are more older people, it's that they're not the same older people. On your left, I present my grandpa, Isaac Cravit. This picture was taken when he was 65 years of age. On your right, the picture of that gentleman was taken when he was 65 years of age. And I made sure of it. I looked up the concert date. I looked up the date of the concert and the year he was born. He was 65. So really quickly going through the two of them, in my grandpa's generation, work is over. Gold watch, work is over. And my grandpa he was an outlier. He lived into his 90s, but he spent 3 decades frozen in that picture. He described himself as an old age pensioner. Work was done. Today, work goes on, and there might be some surprising new twists and even a second career. In the old days, planning for the future was over. My grandpa's big plan was to visit his son, my Uncle Alec, in Miami Beach every winter, and he would start to talk about that, a couple of months before, and maybe, what week will I go? But that was it. He wasn't going to any seminars on reinventing yourself. Today, planning for the future is active, it's positive, and it may take you in surprising new directions, because a 65-year-old today who is healthy, relatively healthy in terms of life, death, health, has a 50-50 shot at hitting the 90s. And a baby girl that will be born, according to the law of averages, in Toronto during our AGM today, could be looking at 110 or more. So what's that child going to do at 65? Spend 40 years in a rocking chair crocheting? I don't think so. So it's changing. Sex is over in my grandpa's age, and this is a serious point here. I know this always rates a chuckle, but in my grandpa's generation, the Pleasantville wife at menopause was just praying that hubby didn't have eyes for the secretary, leaving her done. Today, women are fulfilled as women into their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. And if you think that's just me, opining, a couple of statistics. To the extent that baby boomers are becoming divorced, and the divorce rate, unfortunately, is pretty high, in more than 50% of the cases, it is the woman instituting the divorce. Empty nest, kids are growing up, I never liked you that much anyway, I got a life to lead, I'm out of here. I am out of here, okay? And in all seriousness, though, look at Diane Keaton for L'Oreal, Jane Fonda for L'Oreal, the Dove pro-aging campaign, the president of Revlon saying that the 70-plus market will be the hottest growth market for cosmetics. So the logical outcome of women's lib, the empowerment of women, is when they reach this age, they say no reason to not keep on going, and that's a good thing. Nobody wanted to sell my grandpa anything because his brand choices were frozen in stone. He's already picked his brand of toothpaste. He's already picked his brand of coffee. Why are we going to waste our time advertising to him when we can advertise to his grandson, David, the baby boomers, getting married, forming families, buying new products? That was the classic marketing lifestyle. That's what Don Draper was doing if you watch Mad Men. Today, for our generation, brand choices are not set in stone. There's research that says we're just as disloyal or loyal as the younger generations at every group. What's more, as you'll see, we have the money to pay for it. And then finally, the modern world for my grandpa was engaged only moderately. I think during the 30 years that remained after this photo was taken, he maybe upgraded his TV set a couple times. He certainly watched the newspaper headlines, kept up with current events. I remember him telling us after man landed on the moon and he watched the moonwalk, and his big comment was, "How do you know he's not in Sudbury?" So he kind of watched what was happening, but he was basically a spectator, right? The world was passing him by. He was observing and not really in power. Today, the world is fully engaged. The world is still a playground, and guess who still is running the show? So we can see this new aging, and this has nothing to do, by the way, with the fact that there are many seniors. I don't want, with all the levity, to walk away from the point who are in poverty and who are frail and who are, even those people intellectually are more engaged. But we see some attitudes, and I thought I would show you some from some research that was done by the Print Measurement Bureau, which not only measures magazine readership, but also attitudes of a massive number of people. So the ones I'm going to show you are they give these people a statement. And you're invited, those of you who've done any research, you'll know this technique. Strongly agree, somewhat agree, not too sure, somewhat disagree. So it's like a scale. So I took the top boxes of agreement, okay? I'm interested in understanding how society is evolving. 8 million people, more than that, because this cuts off at age 74. Why would you be interested in understanding how society is evolving if you thought you weren't going to be around for very much longer? I often do something just to prove that I'm able. 7 million of the Zoomer generation. I'm excited by the possibilities of the new technologies. Why would you be if you thought they weren't going to matter to you? If you were passive, if you were withdrawn? Every so often I like to do things that are dangerous. So attitudinally, and I don't mean whether you can do this physically or not, but attitudinally, I'm engaged, I'm busy, I'm in the flow, I'm a player, I'm not helpless if I don't need to be. If I don't, and I certainly don't want to be. So does this look like the old? 2.3 million say they are very interested in unfamiliar destinations for travel. Moses may remember we attended a meeting of the Ontario tourism folks a couple of years ago, and they were complaining that their market, the older audience, as they put it, doesn't want to go up to Georgian Bay anymore and just sit and look at the water all day long in an Adirondack chair and then line up for the early bird buffet. They want to go to Machu Picchu. And when they get to Machu Picchu, there's 7 buses ahead of them in the queue. All of this generation, unfamiliar destinations for travel. 3.5 million say they have a very hectic lifestyle. May not all be pleasure. Some of it may be caregiving and stresses and strains and problems, but it's busy. 3+ million of us have done volunteer work in the past 2 years. Over 5 million have made a donation to charity. We're in the game. Engagement is the theme. We're not necessarily retiring on schedule. We perceive, and God willing it will be true for all of us, but we perceive that we have lots of time left. We need to remain active and involved, and we're interested in exploring, discovering, and reinventing. And as a consequence of this attitude, compounded by certain economic realities, we're changing some things. Now, we talked this morning when Mr. Mulcair was here about working and retiring, and the OAS at 65 or 67. But in fact, this generation is not retiring on schedule. This graph shows you the percentage of people age 55 plus who were still in the workforce in Canada. You can see it drops from the 1970s, 80s, 90s. It bottoms out. Why does it bottom out? That's the year the oldest boomer turns 50 and suddenly realizes I may be underfunded. I may need to keep on working. Plus, I like the idea of working because work validates me and it keeps me going. It keeps my mind sharp. So up goes the curve, up goes the curve. And it's still higher because I think this one cuts off at 2008. So we're seeing record high participation in the labor force. We're also seeing a mixed bag where it's not all retirement, all working. So there's part-time work, there's consulting work, there's keeping your hand in. 500,000 Canadians between the ages of 55 and 64 have established in the last 5 years a home-based business. Part of, if we could fast forward 10 years to some future politician here, I bet one of the things they're going to talk about in addition to credits for caregivers will be credits for small business loans and startups so you can keep on working. It's just a different attitude. It doesn't affect everybody. I'm just giving you little, flashes of what's going on out there. We're also reading more and more of a war of the generations. You can't pick up the paper today without reading about the greedy baby boomers who are not retiring, not getting out of the way, and the poor millennials coming out of university that can't get a job because we're clogging the pipeline. We're reading about the battle for public money between boomers and seniors who want more money spent on pensions and health care and the millennials who need more money spent on education. The millennials are struggling, but that's the headlines. But is this the reality? The reality is very different. The reality is that, yes, the millennials are struggling, but as I'll show you in a minute, guess who's saving the day? Now, we talked about intergenerational concerns, and I thought Mr. Mulcair very appropriately gave credit to those members here who had asked questions showing concern for the next generation. And that whole presentation by Mr. Mulcair sort of spun into an intergenerational thing. And I've got some interesting stats about this. First of all, there is very high unemployment among young people today and a lower participation rate in the labor force. 14% unemployment in Canada, 18% in the United States. Between the ages of 15 and 24, 50% unemployment in Spain among the young people. The student debt load in the United States, and I think Mr. Mulcair talked about leaving university with 20 or 30,000 in debt. The student debt load in the United States is in excess of $1 trillion, higher than the total credit card debt. And in the United States, and I realize we're not in the United States, the two things you cannot protect in the event of a bankruptcy, if you declare bankruptcy, you cannot protect the money you owe the IRS, your taxes, and you cannot protect your college loan. And now we're seeing baby boomers and seniors being chased for these loans. Why? Because they co-signed. So it's a very serious struggle. However, the boomers and seniors are solving the problem. This is my only shameless plug, but I don't have to really plug it because CARP has been good enough to distribute, I think, a copy to the chapter chairs, in which I look at this so-called war and I discover, surprise, we are already shouldering the burden. We are funding adult children still living at home. In many cases, boomers and seniors are delaying retirement in order to produce the needed dollars to keep sustaining the millennials. In many cases, they're delaying downsizing. They're keeping the home that they're in because they need that extra bedroom till junior can get untracked. And we're even seeing some new trends in family formation, which I'll go into in a minute. So we are being creative. So all the questions that were asked to Mr. Mulcair, quite appropriately, about not wanting to burden the next generation, trying to help the next generation, also caring for the previous generation, i.e. the sandwich generation, were very appropriate questions. And the acute need for financial solutions to this is all the more acute because of the problem right now, and it'll go away, but of the problems of the millennials. So let's take a look at some of those numbers. 60% of baby boomers in Canada are providing financial assistance to adult children who are no longer in school, an average of almost $4,000 a year of after-tax income. 10% are also providing assistance at the same time to aging parents. So you're extending it both ways. Now multiply that by the fact that, number one, you have your own needs for longevity. The good news is you're going to live longer. The bad news is you're going to live longer. You know, where we're going to get the money to carry us into our 80s and 90s. So you got your own needs, plus mom, may she live forever, mom or dad, plus Junior. Where does that leave me? It leaves me still working. And so what happened to Freedom 55, everybody knows that famous plan. I'm covered by it, luckily. I'm in good shape. But it means I have to keep working till my kids turn 55. That's what it means. Or as we like to call it around Zoomer, Freedom 95. So Freedom 95 is the new norm. In the United States, 60% of baby boomers, about the same, 59%, also providing financial assistance. 50% were providing housing. 48% were helping with living expenses. 80% of baby boomer women in a survey done in the United States said they were paying more bills for their kids than their parents had paid for them. So the war of the generations, as the media likes to call it, is unique in that one of the armies is actually helping the other army. They're not waiting for the war to be over for the Marshall Plan to kick in. They're providing the Marshall Plan even while the so-called war is raging. How has that ever happened before? So we should take a lot of credit for that, but that's part of the reinvention of aging. The new vision of aging is that you remain active, but also you remain responsible. There's burdens that are being shouldered by everybody in this room that were not shouldered by previous generations. So to some degree, I think a lot of the guilt that perhaps the media would lay on our shoulders is uncalled for. And we even see the rise of grand families, not as an accidental gritting your teeth, forced into it, but as a rational choice. There's 30% increase in the number of multi-generational families in the United States. And according to a survey, these are American numbers, but they're validated by other anecdotal numbers from Canada. 21% said because of the economy. 66% said the economy was only one factor. Job loss, a change in job status. 82% thought there should be more government programs and policies in support of multi-generational households. So perhaps in future, in addition to asking for caregiver grants, we will be lobbying for easier building permits at the local level to allow for housing adaptation and housing credits and some sort of financial incentives for that kind of housing. And we're even seeing, we're even seeing in Canada now, certain home developers and builders are actually offering to the market multi-generational homes that are designed with that purpose right from the get-go. So instead of this sort of saying, oh, gee, grandma's moving in, we better go renovate the bathroom, or Junior's never going to leave the basement, so let's just accept it and turn it into an apartment. Now the entire home is designed for multi-generational use, and that may become a conscious buying decision. Because from the older generation's point of view, if the kids are living in the same house, there's one developer in Ottawa who's coming out with a model that has one facade, but behind it are like two separate bungalows with a corridor running. It looks like one house, but it's really two. From the older generation's point of view, I've got built-in caregiving for my later years. For the younger generation's point of view, I got built-in babysitting for the kids. So it becomes a rational decision. It's only a niche market. I'm not suggesting it's going to be dominant. It's just another signal of what's there. So the new vision of aging really is that the diversity we saw going into the funnel is now reflected in the diversity coming out the other end, if you will. So the aging population today are active. Some are still poor. Some are very needy. We must never take our eye off that ball. I'm not here to tell you everything's fine and everybody's got millions of dollars to spread around. So some of it is what we've seen before, although it's happening later. Some of it is people still working into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, even people who can afford to retire not wanting to because they want to stay active. Some of it is going back to school, going back to university. There's a developer a trend among developers of low-cost, low-rise retirement communities in the United States who are deliberately building these developments on or adjacent to university campuses. Isn't that a wonderful idea? So you can plug right into the whole intellectual life of the university. So we're going to see multiple solutions. It's not going to be one size fits all. So where does all this leave us? It makes the policy issues still very critical. And the traditional issues of seniors, poverty, healthcare, inadequate pensions, to some degree we can feel perhaps a little happier that these seem to be pushed out further and further to older people as opposed to age 65. But certainly the topics that Susan Eng and her team are engaged with are not going to go away anytime soon. But now, new topics get added. Healthcare reform, pharmacare reform, mandatory retirement, ageism. Mandatory retirement wasn't an issue. Back in the old with my grandpa, it was assumed you're 65. How come you're not wearing your gold watch? Where is it? Today, we've got these additional topics. Lifestyle issues are now becoming a big factor as well as purely political issues. We need better information. CARP has a significant responsibility to be the purveyors of that information through Zoomer Magazine and the other Zoomer media channels to say information is now a currency. The health wizard is a currency. How are you going to get the information? Can you get it in a timely way? Can you lay your hands on it? Can you keep up to date with what other people are doing and tap into that knowledge that will enable you to live longer and live better and also discharge your responsibilities? And then community becomes the platform for that physical engagement. And the community means where you live, and it means the CARP chapter. All this, plus, to make it even more complicated, regional and local variations, the variety of individuals, the variety of tastes, the variety of interests. And that's where the CARP chapter really becomes the main lever of that part of the equation and why the CARP chapter is so essential to the entire vision. Because you can think up a new policy idea, you can do the research, you can go online and find the stuff centrally, but to put it into action at the street level where it matters, where it touches the lives of Canadians, we need the other side of the equation, and the other side of the equation is the CARP chapter. So the CARP chapter, if you think you're important now, then in a world in which more information, more variety, more diversity, more, hey, that works in Nova Scotia, but what about this special problem only over here in Alberta? That's only going to increase. So your role and your influence and the need for you to be plugged in and active at the local level will only increase. So these are some aspects. Obviously, time is limited. I've tried to touch some of the high points. My goal has been to maybe provoke thinking rather than just hand down answers. And I thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, David, that's terrific as usual. I have the great pleasure of not only being exposed to David's thinking and his analyses on these kinds of things every day, but every day we seem to find 15 minutes to be able to talk about the U.S. presidential election. And that's really, really fun. We've got 5 or 6 minutes. David said he, as much as anything, wanted to try to provoke question or provoke thought. And while we don't have a lot of time, but I'd be happy to field any questions, or David would field any questions if there are one or two in the crowd. Randy.
I don't have a mic, so I'll yell as loud as I can. But David, I congratulate you because talking to a lot of chairs and chapters, even this morning, here's the words we heard. We wrote them down: seniors, aging population, mature and seniors, seniors issues. All of these things imply something above what you just described. So I'm delighted to see a presentation that says what we're really about, or what we're evolving to, is much more of an intergenerational. I think that word has got to be played much more from a CARP perspective, a Zoomer perspective. This is intergenerational. And it's not 2, it could be 3, it might even be 4.
Yep.
So we're ecstatic at the table.
Thank you.
For
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that point about intergeneration, you know, the first wave of awareness of this is at the older end of the scale because it's the most dramatic. Look at that 65-year-old acting like a 45-year-old. Well, that little baby that we talked about earlier, when they grow up, they're not going to say, look at that 65-year-old acting like a 45. That's what 65 will be. Second point is, if we're reinventing the older side, why isn't it logical that the younger side is also changing? So what looks shocking to us today, he's 29 years old and he's still living at home. Maybe that's what adulthood is going to be. If somebody can live to 150, and we've had speakers at Idea City who have said that with a straight face, then why would it be that strange that it takes you a little longer to, you know, get untracked under the old vision of aging? And if CARP can play a leadership role in pioneering that outreach to the younger generations, so it isn't just, you know, my pension is worth X and how do I get $5 more? Vital though that is, don't get me wrong. If CARP can become a laboratory for the creative outreach to and working with, and we have CARP chapter executives here who are in their 20s. It wasn't just Mr. Mulcair's assistant, or rather his critic for seniors affairs. What a wonderful example CARP could create of that whole intergenerational play. And it would make the whole organization, and I think it's already happening anyway, so we have to just celebrate that a bit more.
One more?
How you doing, Ed?
David,
Yes, sir.
I noticed that many of your comparisons were with the U.S., and that's good, that's fine. Although I know that when we do that for healthcare, I think we make a big mistake in the sense that we don't often compare with other countries like Australia or New Zealand or some of Europe, Great Britain, and so on. And I guess my question would be, do you have data, similar data for other comparisons, some of the OECD type data for this kind of presentation?
Yes, I have a lot of data. I tried to pick the stuff that was closest to home and the easiest to, but certainly if you look at England and Australia, the struggles of the millennials, the idea that the boomers are greedy, that the boomers are going to leave behind all this debt, and what, you know, why won't they get out of the way and let the young people have a turn? Those are exactly the same themes. The specific statistics, you know, vary a little bit. But yes, and I'd be happy to talk to you later and send you stuff. General Romer just reminded me of another intergenerational thing that we're working on, and that is zeroing in on a particular niche in the society, in this case the military and our veterans, and we are working on finalizing now a program where for a limited time, CARP may make available to veterans of all ages, in honor of their service, a free membership or a reduced membership in CARP to attract that generation of service. Okay? And we also know, and you would know way more than I do, General, because I've just read about it, that the military themselves are looking at innovative intergenerational programs. I know with young veterans coming back from Afghanistan who can dialogue about post-traumatic stress with World War II and Korean War. I believe that program's in place. So there's a lot of intergenerational outreach, and CARP will continue to look for the best practices and the best sort of points of intersection where we can be creative and we can show that we're not just gimme, gimme, gimme. We've got knowledge, we've got wisdom, we've got ideals. We want to leave behind a better world. And even though we still need things longer in life than we used to, it's going both ways, and that's what we're going to try to do. So one more question, I think.
David, one thing that I want to remind you about is the work that Ross had done in the intergenerational with Thornley Secondary School, teaching with the students, helping the CARP members with computers.
Yes, this is very important. We have a program going on where students in a high school are assisting CARP members in working with computers. We also have a couple, if I can just piggyback on that topic, we have a couple of other programs going with community colleges where there are CARP chapters that are having meetings there, and the college will even offer courses. We've also had some dialogue with some online learning places who are talking now about using baby boomers as virtual TAs in online seminars. What a wonderful use of the knowledge base in this room, your experience and your knowledge, transferring it to the younger generations as a way of helping the economy, but also intergenerational cooperation. You can look for more of those things. You mentioned computers. University of Toronto, no less. It used to be even 3 years ago that online universities was kind of like a fringe group that the degree wasn't quite as legit. Now there's a new consortium called MOOC, Massive Open Online Courses, MOOC, if you want to look them up on Google. And the brand names associated with MOOC, Open Online Courses, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, U of T. Perfect opportunity for this generation to go back to school on your own pace in your own time, and also to become teachers and trainers of the next generation. So lots of good things are happening. We could devote a whole day to this. And again, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to give you some of the highlights. Thank you.